Hello.
Hey,
You can hear me okay?
yeah, can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Whew. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. How are you feeling?
Nervous as hell, but but I've been here before recently. It's like, okay, it'll get better as I talk. So,
I'm sure it will. Oh, so I'll just invite
yeah.
people.
Okay. And I'm going to kind of just let you take the lead if that's okay on initiating the questions and then
Sounds good.
I'm going to just take a position of just responding.
That's great. So I'll just
Okay.
send invites. Hey, Meg. Uh,
I'm almost kind of glad people can't see my face right now. It's like one less element I have to worry about.
yeah, I'll explain that how
Yeah.
like the whole TikTok situation.
Yeah. And then what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, so my childcare, my brother was sick today, and I am in my car, and it should be fine considering I've got my like brightness turned down. But there might pretty unlikely there'll be any interruptions, but because he's sick, there might be. So just a heads up.
You're good.
Okay.
No problem with that.
Yeah. And if
So,
this goes well, I'm willing to do more of them. So,
mhm. So I'll just leave a few minutes for people to just arrive, and then we
okay.
can get started.
Okay.
Did you have off for is like Good Friday?
Me,
Or
I
like
have
any
every day. I'm home, so all my everything I do is my own thing basically because I the work I do or besides whatever work I'm doing for advocacy is taking care of my dad, and he lives with us. So like everything I do is from home, and you know, that's cool because it offers some flexibilities, but it's also hard because my job is around me all the time. So yeah, I mean, I kind of lose track sometimes of days and holidays and if it's a weekday or a weekend because it kind of smushes together.
yeah, it like a bit during the pandemic when like
Yes.
since everything was off, like
Yeah.
we didn't know what time it was
Yeah.
or like what month it were because
Yes. It was very disorienting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
How about you? Did you have the day off?
I did have the day off. I work for the government, so I had the day off, and I have Monday off as well.
Oh, good. Hi, Ruth.
So
Hi, Ruth.
hi Ruth, hi Iken, hi Memory, hi Victory,
I don't know hardly anybody else, so I'm just gonna say hi
hi
to the probably
Erica,
three
hi
people
Chelsea,
that I recognize.
hi Meg. So I think I got everyone so far.
Okay. Yep, you're in charge. So you tell me what to do and I'm here for it.
I did. I joined TikTok during the pandemic. Hi Levande, I forgot you. I'm sorry.
Hello.
Um, um, and it's been almost 4 years now, and I actually so it'll make sense during my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can get started since
Sure.
many more people will join in as we. But I'll present myself, and then it
Okay.
will give you the template to just um
Okay. Do
rec-
the same.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So my name is Calguerwa. I am originally from Rwanda, and I moved to Canada when I was 6, turning 7, and I lived in Canada for past 20 years now. Um, I am studying in advertising, and I am also a researcher. And my specialization in research is misinformation on TikTok. So this is how I got started. My first research project that I published alongside a university where I live was on electoral misinformation. Um,
Oh.
and alongside my journey on TikTok, I also discovered and got my formal diagnosis as autistic. I already have other diagnoses such as generalized anxiety disorder and ADHD. So that's a bit what I do, and I'm currently still conducting a research project on TikTok,
Mhm.
studying the representation of human rights violation on social media.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So myself, I am 38. I'm a mother of three kids that are disabled due to their various, autism, ADHD. Two of them are ADHD. One of them I don't think is. And then what I would consider a PDA presentation. So we're all kind of in a similar boat as far as needs go. I also, like I said, take care of my dad. He has physical disabilities. I do think he is autistic. Um, and my brother lives with us too to kind of help. So we've kind of created a little community for ourselves of like support, which has helped a lot the last like couple years. I got started because I basically it was a myself. I had a breakdown about 10 years ago, and I really couldn't figure out like what was going on. I just knew that whatever I was doing to try to help myself wasn't actually working. Um, then there was my oldest who developed, situational or selective mutism when he was about 5, where he would only talk to immediate family members, but he actually wouldn't even talk to my dad, even though he lived with us. He just would talk to myself and his brothers and my ex. And when out in public, he wouldn't speak to anybody. He would whisper to me. Um, and that was kind of the pediatrician was like, well, that plus some other things were like flags that maybe he was autistic. So um, we went in to get him, assessed, and I had no preconceptions. I had nothing. Like I had very little actually. So I kind of, autism at that point had never been a special interest for me, which is the only way I feel competent in any topic. Like I really don't throw around much confidence if I haven't like dived into something pretty deeply. So I had no preconceptions, and so after the experience, when the assessor was just like her conclusion on my son's needs was that I was a helicopter parent. Like she was trying to dress
Mm.
it up as something else, but she basically accused me of over protecting him, and it was so shocking to me. I mean, it caught me off guard because if you know me, or once you know me, you'll know that that's like the opposite of my struggles. So I'm always with my kids, have instinctively been looking for ways to let them take charge of their own stuff unless they indicate to me that they need help. And so I was just blown away by that. And then from there, I'm making this a long story, I'm sorry. Um, from there, I later learned about PDA, which when I read it, I was like, yep, like I was like, that's me. And then it took me some time to absorb more about autism to see that I also was autistic. It just, yeah, it's like I did have preconceptions. And so it took time for me to unpack all that. And then I just started sharing my insights and my experiences on my Facebook page. And from there, it's just kind of grown. And now I'm volunteering and I'm like talking to more professionals. And so it's been very cool, but it's also been kind of scary because of, how my life went from being like, I can't do much of anything to now I'm doing stuff, pushing my comfort zone, you know. So yeah, anyway, sorry, that's me.
Thanks for the presentation. It was
Yeah.
great hearing about your story and how you went about discovering about PDA and autism and in
Yeah.
yourself and like your children. For me,
Hmm.
it's a bit of a funny story because when I was a teenager, I had a friend that was diagnosed autistic and I
Hmm.
was diagnosed ADHD. And I told her that I thought that I could be autistic. And at that time, because it was in 2012, I think. Like, so before
Hmm.
the DSM-5, she was like, nah, that's impossible. You can't be autistic. So I kind of like put it away for a bit, considering I
Yeah.
was autistic. And then
Yeah.
during the pandemic, it's like it started brewing, and like I just did a lot of research, which is how
Yeah.
the library that I created came to be. But it was just
Yeah.
like on my phone at first, and I was just like a lurker on TikTok, so I wasn't really making content. I'm still not really making content at all,
Yeah.
and I just figured that since I had all that and it allowed me for greater self-understanding, I could just like make it public. So that's how I
Yeah.
ended up doing all that. So we can start with
Yeah. Okay.
uh, the the questions that we want to speak. So we
Sure.
can just introduce the topic a bit. We're gonna
Okay.
discuss PDA today, a bit of our personal experiences alongside of what we learned alongside the journey, and so it's not meant to be a debate or like to dismiss anyone's personal experiences. It's very much to be sharing and like learning about uh, eventually trying to gain a deeper understanding of what PDA is, especially
Mhm.
and touching on some of the more controversial questions that arise during the discourse on TikTok and in the research landscape as well.
Yeah.
So, um, like, we want to show as well that it's not a situation where it's us versus them,
Yeah.
and like we're not trying to like win this
Yeah.
because there's a lot of unknown that research will eventually be able to give us more answers,
Yeah.
um, but we're just trying to show that especially a few days now from autism awareness and acceptance month, to show that we can have productive discussions with one another about a topic that seems pretty sensitive to a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. And I wanted to say, if it's helpful, what viewpoint I'm representing, just for clarity. So I would consider it like maybe the PDA as a unique neurotype perspective. I'm trying to share from that point of view. And where I've found kind of solidarity is like, uh, and again, I'm trying to put this in a certain way because I'll say right out front. Let me just get out a couple things right out front, because it is super important for me as an advocate. It has been a value of mine all along the way that whatever I'm doing is based on just education and awareness. And I really am very sensitive to the feeling that I might accidentally hurt someone who's already hurting. Like, that is a really big fear of mine. So what's been hard about this space, TikTok, is I really don't have a big footprint on here. I don't at all. I've only been able to approach TikTok on my own terms, and I've been just slow about it because that's what worked for me on Facebook, was just to take my time and to find my way and like not push anything. And eventually I found a way to interact that felt comfortable. So I haven't really had that chance here, and I feel like very nervous because and so if I seem like I'm over reassuring, it's just to let people know that, like, even if I'm coming from a perspective of saying I think PDA is a distinct neurotype and here's why, I would never assume that meant that PDA needs are more important, or it's not a contest. Like, I don't want it to feel like a contest, you know? I want people to know that actually, as an advocate, that I can see the impact of demand avoidance on a lot of different, groups of people in different ways. So it's really just like, can we find, is there anything distinct about the way this demand avoidance presents that helps us understand, helps us provide, you know, to meet needs in a specific way, just to be effective? Like, that's pretty much it, is just being effective. So I just want to throw that out there.
That's perfect. So I think we can start off with like a very very like big point that has been touched on. It's the whole we can define PDA. So PDA is defined as pathological demand avoidance. So it's defined as uh, high driven anxiety to avoid ordinary demands of life with strategies such as procrastination, you can add to the definition because I'm really going off the top of my head and I don't
That's,
have like a source.
yeah, I didn't write it down either. I wrote a few notes down, but that was literally not one of those notes. So hopefully people can just know from, you know, the demands of life, and even like the PDA Society, you know, generic description people can read, which is a starting place. So,
It is a good starting place, and then we can just touch on that definition.
yeah.
So, my mutual memory, persistent drive for A.
Yeah.
Their
Yeah.
username always makes me crack up. They did
Yeah.
a video about the PDA versus ODD.
Yeah.
So PDA is pathological demand avoidant, and ODD is demand uh,
Opposite.
oppositional defiance disorder. I'm
Yeah.
losing my word because it's at
That's
night.
okay.
And ODD is a very racialized diagnosis that is
Hmm.
given overwhelmingly to um, Black children and
Hmm.
especially Black males. And
Yeah.
PDA, from my personal perspective,
Hmm.
um, like is a diagnosis or a label that could encompass the same behaviors that
Hmm.
would match an ODD diagnosis, but
Yeah.
the people that tend to relate with that label, it's not the same demographic. So
Right.
to my what I observe is uh, people who tend to have a lot neurodiversity affirming approach and who embrace PDA tend to
Yeah.
be white people and white neurodivergent people, and
Hmm.
that leads me to like some having some questions because uh,
Yeah.
could PDA and ODD be um, discussing the same
Problem.
subset of experiences,
Hmm.
but it's just we're just describing the the external presentation,
Yeah.
which is like the vindictiveness, uh, or
Hmm.
like um, versus for PDA, we would be describing the
Hmm.
internal somatic experience of the person
Yeah.
that is avoiding demand because of high anxiety.
Right.
So we want to understand how come there is an overrepresentation of
Hmm.
assigned female at birth people, women
Yeah.
who identify as PDA,
Hmm.
versus the a diagnosis of ODD that is overwhelmingly given
Yeah.
to Black
To, yeah.
men, to
Hmm.
Latino men, to Indigenous children. So we want
Right.
to just discuss that so you can
Okay.
start
Sure. Okay. Yeah,
the
sorry. I'm
discussion.
trying to stop myself from talking over you because I want you to get your full thought out. So, but I'm not trying to make
You're
you feel
good. You're
like
good.
you
I'm
have to
finished.
carry the whole thought yourself. Yeah, so first of all, absolutely. Like totally okay, so again, sorry, a little background here. What was fascinating to me about these discussions happening on TikTok was that these are all discussions happening within the PDA as a neurotype communities, but from a different angle. So first of all, like, you're not ignored, or it's not an oversight from like the people that I'm connected with anyway. Not saying it's not seen in other areas, because like I don't know, I'm not really super familiar with how PDA is being talked about on TikTok. I know a couple creators, but barely anything, because part of my struggle, part of my autistic struggles is that I have a harder time absorbing information over video. So like sometimes people will send me like videos and it makes me angry, um, because it just I've realized recently that I do have some like auditory processing struggles. So reading things has always come more comfortably to me. So I am not familiar with how those talks are happening in those spaces. But in the spaces I'm in, we absolutely do see it. And so just to share our interpretation of why we see it that way, for one thing, oppositional defiance disorder is really just talking about a specific set of behaviors. It really isn't, and that's the struggle with the DSM in general. It really is looking from the outside and kind of trying to create compartments to describe people. And yes, the intention might be to help. I mean, if we're going to assume, let's assume good intention on the mental health profession, even though we know that's not always true. If their intention is to help, there's a lot of problems with just, just assigning a diagnosis based on, external presentation, because a lot of things can look alike, as we know, even when it comes to neurodiversity that's from birth, like autism and ADHD. There are some traumas that otherwise neurotypical people can go through that can then show up looking like, some of these things, depending on what their trauma is and, what their situation is. So it's really becomes very complicated to like tease all those things apart. Why we would say that PDA, oh, one thing, because I forget things, so I'm going to jump around. Statistically speaking, I would totally validate without checking numbers that most of the advocates are white females. Okay, that's just a given. I mean, even in Facebook. Statistically though, as far as like, I believe, and someone else can look this up for me, that's fine. It actually is a 50-50 representation on male and female for PDA, and presentation is male and female is 50-50, which autism is what, like, supposed to be, which I don't believe, but autism is supposed to be what, like 30-70 or something, in favor of male. Males are supposed to, I think that's an issue with understanding autism. I think that's an issue with
But
understanding,
oh,
the culture. um, so there is when it comes to gender, there is a 50-50 split as far as the people or kids who are diagnosed or identified as PDA specifically. The other thing I would say too is that ODD has become kind of a catch-all. And when you are in a marginalized community, what I observe is that you are more likely to get a catch-all diagnosis and something that's not more nuanced, not more, forward thinking and trying to understand behavior. I do think that it's quite possible that ODD does exist though. And, just again, based on like conversations I'm having in, groups with parents, and, it sounds like what ODD can be is like, if it's a true diagnosis, quote unquote, it's a child who's gone through, maybe a very severe ongoing trauma. And what you would see then is that their reactions are going to be very focused on the institutions or individuals that have harmed them. So it would be centered on reacting to, schools, authority figures, because their experience might be that the authority figures have misinterpreted them or harmed them or whatever. So like that's very well possible that is what's happening. The difference between what I would say a PDA, someone who's experiencing PDA, and someone who is experiencing ODD would be that the PDA is going to present in all areas of life, not just in like reactions to the things that harmed them. And so I'll kind of go into that in a little more depth. I'm not sure where to stick that, because I made some notes for myself as far as like what are some, like, there's a variety of PDA behaviors, and a lot of the ones that are being highlighted they're the ones that are kind of like, oh my gosh, this person is creating a problem to the system, right? So
Mhm.
like, and that's how things get seen, because oh my gosh, you're not fitting into the system somehow. That's how autism was first seen, right? I mean,
Like if I
like,
look things through the oppositional defined disorder framework, like if I am a young autistic black person and I
yeah.
am ostracized at school from my social communication differences,
Hmm.
I am not understanding the social rules in
Yeah.
place because of my social communication differences, and
Yeah.
like I'm not giving a structure and a school
Yeah.
system, and I'm discriminated against for my race. I could see how some autistic children would become like excessively arguing with adults, because even
Yeah.
myself as a child, I was excessively arguing with others. I was blaming others for my
Hmm.
mistakes because
Yep.
I didn't know what were my executive function differences.
Right.
I was definitely feeling spiteful, even though I didn't enact upon that feeling, and I was definitely saying mean things and hateful
Right.
things when upset. And I can see that things being true with for a lot of children who fit the PDA profile, or
Right.
so I'm like, it's
Yes.
just that
Yes.
I I understand, like what I find interesting from what I gather in the studies about PDA is that
Hmm.
even if in some studies it like ODD is as
Hmm.
co-occurring in autistic children as ADHD. So
Yeah.
autistic children are as likely to have ADHD or ODD. When we look at the self-report
Hmm.
diagnosis of ODD in
Hmm.
studies, it is around 1%,
Hmm.
whereas uh like it's actually about 30% of like core currents. So I'm like,
Yeah.
is it
Yeah, what's the thing here?
what?
Well, in ODD, think about it. ODD is a specific set of behaviors that are kind of human. You know, they're just a very human set of reactions where fight, basically, let's call that the fight trauma response. So it makes total sense that a lot of different reasons. So I kind of am wondering, I know this isn't really the topic for today, but I'm kind of wondering if it makes more sense that ODD shouldn't really be a diagnosis. It really should just be a, I don't know how to put that, but like just a set of symptoms that should then lead to investigation to figure out the causes, because the causes of those behaviors could be as varied as, I mean, they're all over the map, you know. So
I
that's why I have a hard time with it, you know, is it, and not even just in the issue of color, it's in the issue, because this is happening too within, you know, the white community, where a lot of kids are getting that label of ODD because of the focus on behavior. And you know, we know the medical mental health community is just very focused on behavior, focused on fixing behavior, not as focused on applying supports, you know. So especially if you are born with neurodivergence, trauma has a little more wiggle room, you know. They're giving more understanding that, oh, this person went through something that changed them. But I mean, even there, it's kind of problematic
like
sometimes.
I think the same can be said about PDA.
Yeah.
Like the subset of avoiding demand can be have many different root causes that needs to be
Yeah.
addressed
Okay.
individually.
Yeah.
So same thing
Sure.
for ODD, because ODD, it's a diagnosis that
Hmm.
one does not have to feel impaired by their
Yeah.
symptoms to receive that diagnosis. So that's
Yeah.
why it's given to a lot of minority children to limit
Yeah.
their opportunities in the school system, and it's
Yeah.
used to lead a lot of minority children to the
Right.
school to prison pipeline.
Exactly. Yeah. And
So
you're gonna find solidarity on that, at least in the, again, I can't speak for the TikTok community. I don't know anything. But I can speak to you know, PDA North America. Look, that is literally word for word, almost like what we've been talking about, is that we are really concerned, you know, about that pipeline. And so we do validate that. And there was something else I was gonna say. Oh yeah. I have to say things before I forget them. The other thing about this conversation around color and what diagnosis you get is that there are I mean, more stresses in marginalized communities. There are more pressures in marginalized communities. I think just providing an alternative explanation here is that the reason why you're seeing this come out of white community first could be because we have the privilege of even being able to examine individuals apart from some of those extra stressors. Like there are stressors no matter what, especially if you're autistic, if you're ADHD, like you're gonna have different needs than the neurotypical community. But then you add the stresses of race and marginalization, and to me that's like I'm like, that's like survival mode. Like you guys, I understand needing to just like, nobody is trying to take the time, first of all. Nobody's trying to take the time to understand why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. um you're just kind of getting like, okay, we'll just figure it out, and if you can't figure it out, then you are the problem. So there's that. Whereas in the white community, we're having that privilege of being, which is kind of what you've already said, like people trying to take the time to understand, right? Like trying to figure out what is going into it. Whether the conclusions are accurate or not, at least someone's trying to take the time. And so would it be helpful? Because I actually asked one of the bigger PDA communities that has a lot of adults online is called PDA Universal. I went ahead earlier today and last minute I was like, hey, can you guys share any experiences with me that you feel like are uniquely PDA, so that I could help illustrate why we're saying there's a difference. And so I had some examples I wanted to share. Do you think this is a good spot to do that?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
It's going to tie in with our next point of
Oh, okay.
do we think, or what does research say so far about if PDA is unique to autistic people, or if it can
Yeah.
present in um, a lot of other conditions?
Okay, cool. Okay, so here's what we would say. I picked out what some of my favorites were. And again, if I'm giving these examples, I'm not saying these are the only examples of how our PDA affects us. I'm picking them only because a lot of, like, if it is a distinct neurotype, um, PDA is like, my demand avoidance is going to layer onto other demand avoidances as well. So you've got demand avoidances from, sensory sensitivities, and demand avoidances due to attention deficit, or, so like, if I'm saying it's distinct, I'm saying it's on top of those. And I think it's hard to like parse that apart if it could be attributed to something else. So these are some examples I thought were good from the community and from myself to say, like, these highlight to me examples of when it's just a PDA thing. So one of them is, and the kind of the theme I'm looking for is, oftentimes my PDA will prompt me to act in ways that are actually more complicated. They are harmful to me. They will prompt me to do things that are actually um, harming myself. And they're not driven by any like, I can't say like, oh, I had a past experience with this thing and that's why now I like feel driven to do it. Um, so for instance, one of them is I've caught myself, this is something I didn't even notice until later, but I caught myself that I will often wear weather inappropriate clothing. And by that, I mean in the summertime, I will wear my sweaters and jackets, even though it makes me uncomfortable, even though it makes me feel hot. Um, and in the wintertime, I will often choose clothing that is more appropriate for summer, even though it makes me feel cold and even though it makes me feel uncomfortable. And that's why when we're having this discussion around research and PDA, I find it helpful. I am very glad actually that it sounds like Woods has highlighted that, hey, there are rational demand avoidances, okay? We're saying that our PDA adds a layer of irrational demand avoidance to our life, which is what makes it so complicated to work with. So that's one example. And I'll just rattle off a few others. One of them was, this is another one from myself. I used to make plans for myself just so that I could cancel those plans. because the canceling of the plans just gave me such a feeling. It was like exhilarating. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. Like I could have had an average day before, but if I planned something and then gave myself permission to cancel it, it was then a great day for me. Um, Another one was Rico. So Rico has a blog and she's somewhat active on Facebook. She's partnered up with PDA Society before. What I love about Rico is she does not identify with anything ADHD. So I think it's a really good thing to highlight some of her experiences because some of the PDA traits like novelty could be attributed to, an ADHD experience because ADHD also is driven by novelty. And so she doesn't report any kind of inattention issues like, any of the struggles around what we would identify as ADHD, but she will do things. One of them is she walked into a thorn bush because she knew that it would hurt, but her instinct was that because she was scared of the thorn bush, she pushed herself, or not pushed herself, she was compelled to just walk into it because of it feeling threatening, because of it feeling scary. She leaned into that. And this is just the last one I'll do. Someone in the group reported that they work in a big a big factory that is refrigerated, so it's very cold. They will avoid hot drinks, even though it would help regulate their temperature better. And they added that their friend has even offered to make or will make the drink for them, so they don't even have to do it, and they will still refuse the drink. So those are the things we're kind of trying to describe as like, we are just, it kind of makes sense to me, even though we're still learning what's going on here, that when this is described as a nervous system disability, that this is like an overactive nervous system. To me, that would make sense of these bizarre, like contradictory kind of behaviors where it's like, why? Like, why would a person do that? And I can say, I have no idea, except that the more pressure, whether it's a pressure I put on in my own mind, or whether it's something someone is putting pressure on me for on the outside, I will then have this emotional struggle around that thing that makes me often act in ways that are contradictory to my own best interest. So go ahead, I'll pause there. My mouth
I
is so dry right now.
hear I hear the what you're saying, and a lot of people have proposed a lot of hypotheses as to why these behaviors could be occurring, whether these individuals are like not I'm not want to say that because
Mm-hmm.
because of alexithymia, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
feelings we are experiencing as autistic people, and with our
Yeah,
processing speed, we can only make sense of many months, years later. So
right.
these are just hypotheses to guide the people who are
Yeah,
showing these. So there's someone said um, hyposensitivity, like sensory seeking, because like I'm an autistic person with ADHD, and I
mm-hmm.
have like really poor impulse control. So when I went through really stressful periods, um, like I would get a tattoo, get body modifications, which explains why I
Right,
have so
right.
many body
Yeah,
modifications, and even
yeah,
doing them myself, because even
yeah,
though my like tattoos are my special interest and I know the risk of doing them at
right,
home, like that,
right,
it's not rational to do that, but within
right.
the framework of my whole situation, it made sense as
Yeah,
to why I was doing these dangerous, risky behaviors for myself.
right,
So
right.
we want
Okay,
to, we
that's
can
good.
touch on the next topic,
Well,
which we wanted to,
can I make a comment there real quick on that one?
of course,
And it might tie into the next one. So, where I would highlight that I think PDA is showing something distinct beyond just like, that's a great example. I think that's a really great example. Is the way we then solve the problem. So, like as a PDA person, the kind of advice that I give to other PDAers is not usually is not ever. Well, no, that's not true. Hold on. So I have a PDA set of specific kind of a lens through which I will give advice on how to resolve PDA specific struggles. Now, there might be other, you know, struggles alongside that or other things going on, which we also address in our group. So we don't just like bypass over, let's talk about, you know, what could this be telling us about your autistic needs, or what could this be telling us about your ADHD needs, or even trauma or like stress in general. But the first thing I go from a PDA perspective is I go, let's diffuse the tension on this issue. So like, for instance, the person who, these are just hypotheticals, right? So the person who was struggling with the hot drink, my advice that is like centered from a PDA point of view would be saying like, I would either, first of all, I would tell them, fine, you don't have to drink it, that's okay, and just leave it there. The other thing I might do is I might provide an option like ice water. So sometimes having something that kind of balances the scales as far as choices go can immediately diffuse the perception of a demand, and that will open up the possibility for them engaging with the activity or engaging with the thing that they need to do. So that's one example. The weather thing, I'm trying to, I mean, it's hard on the spot here, but I feel like it's important. So give me 1 second here. Let's see, weather inappropriate clothing. That one's fine. That one's not even harmful. I don't care that I wear weather inappropriate clothing. So I don't really troubleshoot that one. Making plans with myself just for the joy of canceling. I don't know.
I do that
Well,
too.
I guess I'll go to
I do that too.
what's that? Oh yeah, it's like, oh, this is so nice. I can do what I want to do, and I
But
get that sense of choice.
it is the
Go
relief
ahead.
of having, it's like it's not that much of the agency, but it's because like especially a lot of people do that when they unmask. It's like they feel they have always extended, like accommodating others, always
Oh
others,
yes,
always others, always others. And when you give yourself the grace to say no to things, it's when you can
right.
actually feel the relief to be like, oh, it's, I didn't have to overextend, like
Yes, yeah.
to my own detriment.
Right. That
Like,
totally makes sense. You're right. From a trauma perspective, that is totally valid, like, or just like that makes sense to me. So this one I've leaned on a lot recently, and this will be the last example I give for now. So I was struggling with playing my video game, okay? And I did comment on this one in a thing, but I find it helpful because it's like I was struggling with playing a video game, and it was not because of, well, I would say it was not because of any kind of like executive functioning struggle around the video game itself. I have been playing it for a while. I actually got back from a trip and I really, really wanted to play it. So my assessment of myself was that it was triggering me because I was back home. I really wanted to play it. So the way that I helped myself to try to get past that demand avoidance was that I looked at my list of movies that I have because I'm forgetful. My ADHD, I'm super forgetful. So I looked at my list of movies and reminded myself that there were shows that I really, really also wanted to watch. And then all of a sudden, because I had choice, I had multiple choices, and I don't have any trauma around movies or entertainment or anything. Once I had that openness of like, hey, there's more than one thing that I really, really want to do, I felt like I had a choice. And that option of a choice made me feel less, it felt less threatening to me. So then I was able to engage in my video game again. And that is kind of something too. Rico posted something recently about the paradox of like, with PDA, sometimes you think like, okay, well, if this person is struggling with basic functioning, you don't want to put more on their plate. Like you don't want to overwhelm them with even more options, but sometimes more options helps us to feel like there's choice. And that emotional feeling that's going along with it is diffused because it's like, oh, I have choices here, in my own hobbies, in my own interests, things that I love and enjoy, and now I can kind of engage in it. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, but we can move to the next question, or this will take forever, unless you want to say something.
no, I'm good. I wanted to touch on if PDA only exists in autistic people or can it present in holistic people, and I'll start with
Okay.
a little research, like about research. So
Yes.
when PDA was coined as a term in the 1980s by Elizabeth Newson, and she conducted an observation in her clinic from the 1975 to 2000, where she observed
Mhm.
a set of 150 people, 75 male and 75 female,
Mhm.
who did not match the autism diagnostic criteria of the time. After
Yeah.
that, she proposed it as another type of pervasive developmental disorder that was
Mhm.
not at that time Asperger's or autistic disorder. It was separate from these
Mhm.
two entities. So that
Right.
was 2003. After
Yes.
that, there were some more research made, and eventually, a researcher named Elizabeth Onions developed a questionnaire made to assess PDA behaviors called the Extreme Demand Avoidance Questionnaire, which has been used
Mhm.
mostly in the UK, where all of these research have been conducted about PDA. But
Mhm.
so far, most of the research that have been made on PDA were the only diagnoses that were disclosed by the participants of the
Mhm.
study
Right.
were either PDA or autism. So we don't know
Mhm.
much about other profiles
Yeah.
until a study in 2020 came out. It's available in my library. It's called
Mhm.
Individual Differences, ADHD, Adult
Mhm.
Pathological Demand Avoidance, and Delinquency.
Yeah.
And that research found there were 132 participants of a mean
Mhm.
age of 34 years old. And that study found that ADHD was a better predictor
Mhm.
of PDA traits than
Mhm.
uh, autism. So
Autism.
now
Right.
there's a lot of discussions amongst researchers to ask themselves, what is PDA? Does it only present in autistic people? And like
Yeah.
if it's linked to other conditions such as ODD, anxiety, trauma,
Mhm.
OCPD, many
Mhm.
other conditions that are often co-occurring with autism. So I will give
Right.
my personal opinion on that.
Okay, go for it.
My personal thing about that is that I think in 2003, it was during the DSM-4, um, and basically, autism and ADHD were diagnoses that could not co-occur
Mhm.
together. And I think because in the original study, Elizabeth Newson has stated that these individual did not match the autism criteria of that time.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if she involuntarily observed ADHD
Mhm.
before ADHD was even allowed, which
Yeah.
took place in 2013. Because from my
Mhm.
personal standpoint, many people who I have seen either identified with PD profile had
Mhm.
either autism, ADHD, or both combined, or
Correct.
severe issues with executive functioning. So I'm
Yes.
wondering
Yeah.
if, because autism and ADHD couldn't be considered co-occurring, she
Right.
was observing something that didn't even exist until a
Right.
decade later.
Yeah.
That's
And
my
that's oh oh
hypothesis that I have, but that's not validated by any research. That's just
well
I'm
no,
just
it's a
observing.
good no, it's a really good observation. And just so you know, within the PDA community, we actually oftentimes, and I mean, we encourage open discussion about these things. So people have brought up that possibility more than once. Like, could this be ADHD plus whatever? And like, is that what's going on here? Um, just my contribution to that thought, and let's, if we, I think it helps if we frame this discussion, like your theories, my theories, whatever, as hopefully a place to start to narrow down where to research and how to do it. I think that is the contribution that this can make, is like this helps kind of potentially cut some of the clutter, I think. So with that, I work alongside Sally Cat quite a bit. We're friends. We both have a special interest in trying to discern, what the heck is going on with PDA. What is this? So she, along with Rico, and I think they created this about, I don't know when it was, but about 8 years ago. I'm just totally guessing. But they created an informal peer survey that's still up. And it was where they kind of highlighted PDA specific traits and then autism. And I think they pulled it from the ADOS. It says in the survey where they pulled their, questions from. And it's pinned to her Facebook page if anybody wants to check it out. But from that survey, the intention was to show, like out of 50, how high do you score on what the community has reported as like PDA specific demand avoidance traits. And then, in the second half, it was just highlighting, okay, now where do you score on, autism specific traits?